If right now your life feels like a map with missing roads, if you wake each morning and the path you expected has disappeared, stop and listen with faith. God may be revealing why you're going through all this. That sentence is not a neat solution. It is an invitation. It names the ache you carry and hands you an alternative way to hold it. You are not being asked to pretend everything makes sense. You are being asked to consider that the confusion itself might be doing something inside you that you cannot yet see. It's okay to admit how tired you are. You can say it aloud. The weariness, the questions, the way hope feels thinner than it used to. You might have been faithful in some routine, prayer, work, family commitments, and expected change to follow. Instead, you met silence, delay, or even open rejection. Those experiences wound us. They unsettle the edges of identity and make us ask, why is this happening? Is God absent? Has the promise passed me by? Are my mistakes finally catching up with me? These are honest questions, and they deserve a gentle answer, not a slogan. The first thing I want to give you is permission to feel the weight of them without shame. The second is a reframing. Sometimes what looks like senseless suffering is not a broken plan, but a hidden process. Not a punishment, not a simple obstacle, but a season of formation, slow, subterranean work that changes the person more than the circumstances. Think about how a tree grows. You admire the trunk and the leaves, but most of the work happens where you cannot see. Roots weaving through soil, sending up strength for storms, searching deep for water. That underground effort is messy and takes time. The leafless months are not useless. They are the season the roots use to expand under the surface. So it is with your life. The visible parts may be thin right now. The invisible parts may be getting stronger. Call this idea the difference between problem and process. A problem is what you bump against and hate. The unfair boss, the broken relationship, the door that closed. A process is what those clashes do to you over time. They refine patience, teach steadiness, expose dependency, loosen false identities. Problems demand solutions. Processes demand endurance and interior attention. And God often prefers the long, quiet route of formation over the dramatic fix. I do not say that lightly. Scripture shows us both, moments of sudden rescue and long seasons of waiting. But if you have been enduring a stretch with no visible breakthrough, consider that God's activity may be more about who you are becoming than about what changes immediately in your external world. This is not a rule to make suffering acceptable. It is a lens that can change how you live inside the suffering, without denying the pain of it. If what I'm saying resonates with you, write this beneath the video. God is working even when I don't understand. That small act of naming can be a quiet pledge to sit with God rather than run from the discomfort. Now, before we go further, let me offer a simple picture to hold in your mind. Imagine a craftsman shaping a piece of wood. The craftsman does not begin by carving the handle and then wait to see if the wood will split. He chooses the grain, supports the piece, turns it, and works slowly. Sometimes he leaves the wood to rest for a day, notices a crack that only appears when the light hits from a certain angle, and then adjusts his tools. The rhythm matters, sawing, planing, waiting, checking. God is often like that craftsman, steady, unseen at times, intimately aware of the grain of your interior life, shaping by small tools of circumstance. The story of Joseph in the Bible is the clearest illustration of this truth. You know the bones of it. A young man with dreams, envied by his brothers, sold into slavery, taken to a foreign land. He prospers under Potiphar's roof, then is falsely accused and thrown into prison. For many years he dwells in confinement and obscurity, yet the threads of his life, his early dreams, his humility and service, his refusal to compromise virtue, are being woven into something larger. Through those hidden seasons, he learns discernment, leadership, patience, and a firmness of character that will be necessary when doors finally open again. Notice three things in Joseph's path that map clearly onto what you might be living now. First, promise precedes pain. Joseph received dreams, a sense that God had something ahead for him, and yet the very people closest to him turned against that promise. You might have known, perhaps for a long time, that there was a calling, a vocation, a hope, and then encountered rejection that made the promise feel distant or laughable. That does not mean the promise was false. Sometimes God plants the promise like a seed and then allows temptations and trials to fertilize the soil around it. Second, rejection and exile do not erase preparation. Being sold to a foreign land, serving in Potiphar's house, and even being incarcerated were not distractions from God's plan. They were the context in which Joseph learned to steward influence and maintain integrity when the crowd did not applaud him. There is an inward apprenticeship that happens when everything external appears to move backward. You are learning how to keep faith when the scoreboard suggests defeat. Third, presence in prison often looks like absence but is full of formation. The Bible doesn't tell us Joseph's every thought in confinement. It tells us that God was with him. It tells us that Joseph gained the trust of those in charge and that his gifts were sharpened even there. The visible redemption came later. The invisible formation happened in the interval. Do not take this as a story about instant reward for virtue. Joseph was not promoted because he checked the right boxes. He endured real pain, loss, and betrayal. The message is not a tidy, do this, get that formula. It is a pastoral truth. Long seasons can be the schoolrooms of our souls. So how do you recognize when silence is actually a season of formation and not simply stagnation? There are small signals, quiet, easy to miss, that indicate interior change. Notice them both for what they are and for the hope they carry. One sign: you are less reactive than you used to be. A year ago you might have exploded when offended. Now you find yourself breathing, naming the hurt, and choosing response over immediate retribution. This is not weakness. It is the slow strengthening of restraint, the muscle of patience getting built by use. God is not making you brittle. He is giving you steadiness. Another sign: your disappointments no longer define you. When things fall apart, you still feel pain, but there is an inner witness who says, this hurt is part of a story larger than the moment. The wound hasn't disappeared, but it stops being the only thing you see. That wider gaze is spiritual maturity in training. A third sign: you begin to set small, healthy boundaries, not as a harsh line of protection that keeps people out, but as a guardrail that preserves the inner work. Where you once gave all your energy to prove yourself, now you refuse more often to be used as a proving ground. That refusal is not selfish. It is a stewardship of the person God is shaping. Fourth, you find moments of sufficient peace. They are not fireworks of joy. They are small pockets where calm sits with you and says, what you feel now does not have to be your final word. These pockets are the fingerprints of an inner transformation that does not need constant drama to validate itself. Fifth, you notice capacity to wait. Not a resignation that shrugs and says nothing will ever change, but a composed endurance. You can tolerate unknowns without giving up your life to panic. Waiting here is not passive. It is a patient, active posture. Think of it as watchfulness rather than inactivity. If some of this feels foreign, that's expected. Formation is not uniform. It looks different in every person. But name whatever small shift you sense, no matter how modest, and treat it as evidence, not as illusion. A tiny change is still change. It accumulates. You might be tempted to make this process faster. Here is a common temptation: the desire to control outcomes. When seasons stretch, it is easy to adopt frantic strategies, leap into anything that promises a quick result, make big moves to force an answer, latch onto every new voice that claims certainty. Those actions can feel active, but they often scatter the very interior energy you need to be formed. In the craftsman's image, shaking the wood will not make the grain better. It may split it. Instead, consider small disciplines that create space for formation without pretending to force God's hand. These practices are less about impressing God and more about preserving you so the process can do its work. First, reclaim simple presence. Find a short time each day, a few minutes, where you intentionally stop the rush and notice. Name one feeling. Say, I am tired, or I am angry, or I feel small. Naming is not resignation, it is recognition. When you put a name on the interior state, you keep it from running the show unconsciously. Second, practice small acts of mercy toward yourself. Many of us become perfectionists in waiting, believing that if we could just be morally superior enough, God would move. That belief crushes the soul. Instead, allow softness. Forgive yourself for the mistakes. Allow the pause in productivity. Accept that your rhythm may be slower. Mercy is not neglecting responsibility. It is refusing to treat suffering as proof of personal failure. Third, cultivate a tiny habit of disciplined attention to what is true. Each evening, name one thing you saw God do that day. A kind gesture, a word that comforted, a moment of clarity. This habit rewires perception over time. It trains you to look for threads of providence, not only for headline miracles. Fourth, choose presence over avoidance in relationships. Reach out to one trustworthy person and say, "I'm not okay right now." You do not need to solve everything in that conversation, but the act of admitting vulnerability builds a muscle of honest connection. Isolation is the enemy of formation. Companionship is its ally. Fifth, allow grief to have shape. Some losses in these seasons are not fixable. Relationships that ended, trust that was broken, years of expectation that did not come to pass. These require small rituals of mourning, a letter, a simple goodbye, a symbolic act that acknowledges the loss. Grief clears space for something new to take root. All these practices are modest by design. They do not promise instant reversal. They create conditions in which depth can grow. They prevent you from burning out or hardening into a premature solution that will later fracture. Let's return to Joseph and look a little closer at how his inner life seems to have been formed during exile and prison. We do well to resist turning him into a fairy tale hero whose suffering only existed to make him impressive. He was a wounded man, betrayed by the family who should have been his refuge. He lived in places where his voice mattered less, and yet he retained an inner orientation toward truth and service. In Potiphar's house, he managed the affairs faithfully. In prison, he became a presence of order and counsel. He did not stop being who he was, because circumstances did not honor him. If anything, those circumstances exposed what needed to be refined. There is a subtle but important theological point here. Divine favor does not mean absence of trial. In Joseph's life, favor and trial are not opposites, they are coupled. The dreams he received were of favor, but favor did not exempt him from suffering. If you are waiting for a life without pain as a sign that God is present, you may miss the deeper pattern that God's presence often accompanies the refining fire rather than preventing it. This is a humbling but freeing truth. It frees you from measuring God's presence solely by comfort and invites you to learn to recognize God in the schoolroom of hardship. Perhaps one of the hardest pieces of this kind of formation is the long silence about why it's happening. Silence can feel like absence. The temptation is to fill that silence with meaning. This is because I sinned, or God is punishing me, or I failed and deserve this. Sometimes such conclusions come from a place of confession and repentance. Sometimes they come from fear and oversimplification. Let your posture be one of humility and curiosity, rather than hasty certainty. Ask, "Lord, what are you doing?" rather than rushing to blame yourself or everyone else. There is also a dangerous posture to avoid: emotional closure. When things hurt for a long time, one defense is to lock the door and refuse further openness. No hope, no risk, no investment. That hardened defense can keep pain away in the short term, but it blocks formation. If you want to be shaped by God in this season, practice staying open in small ways. Receive a kindness you did not expect. Take a step toward a relationship with caution, not with cynicism. Open one small door you have kept shut and watch how the interior starts to move. You may be thinking, "This is all fine in theory, but I need something concrete." That honesty is good. The concrete comes in small, repeatable choices, what you choose day after day when nothing spectacular happens. It looks like continuing to show up for the moment when your heart says, "Walk away." It looks like choosing to speak truth in a meeting where you could have stayed silent and kept your safety. It looks like refusing to respond in rage to a text that stings. These are tiny rebellions against the tyranny of immediate feeling. Over time, they become the fiber of a new character. One of the most common signs that growth is happening is the recalibration of expectation. You begin to see that the quick fix is not always the best fix. You start to grieve the dream of rapid success, and with that grief comes a steadier hope, one that is willing to invest in depth. This is not settling for less. It is choosing a foundation over a flash. When the foundation is being laid, your patience functions not as passivity, but as strategic endurance. And yet endurance by itself is not the same as formation. You can be stoic or numb and call it endurance. The difference is interior attention. Formation requires you to watch what is changing inside you. Are you growing in compassion? Are you learning to pray differently? Are your loyalties shifting from public acclaim to a quieter fidelity? These inner landmarks will guide you more reliably than external milestones. There will be moments of discouragement. This is unavoidable. In those moments, remember the craftsman image and Joseph's nights in prison. The darkness is not the absence of work. It can be the cover under which work quietly happens. Your calling is to remember the promise in some modest way, not to relive it as a guarantee that everything should already look different, but to allow it to be an orientation when the world feels disoriented. Before we move forward, take inventory with me. I want you to list either aloud or in silence 3 small things that are different in you now compared to a year ago. It might be a new habit, a softened reaction, a moment of clarity, or a boundary you finally set. Don't judge the list. If it feels short, that is okay. Even one small change is a foothold. Keep it. Tend it. Tell someone you trust about it. Naming progress creates a thread of continuity through your days. There is another piece of pastoral counsel I want to give, and it is simple, though not always easy. Refuse to interpret every difficulty as moral failure. Yes, some struggles result from choices we made, but many do not. A season of formation can come through circumstances beyond moral missteps, the collapse of an industry, cultural shifts, illness, complex family dynamics. If you make every hardship a proof of your inadequacy, you will stay small. Instead, invite a gentler conversation. Ask, what is true here rather than, what did I do wrong? The first opens space for learning. The second often narrows into shame. As you walk through this season, cultivate a language of possibility. Say to yourself, it is possible that something is being formed in me I cannot yet name. This sentence is neither trite nor magical. It is a posture of faith, an act of trust in the slow craftsmanship of God, who more often than not prefers to work beneath the surface. Here is one practical invitation I want to leave with you for now. Choose one small thing to practice for the next week that honors your interior life. It might be as modest as 5 minutes of undistracted silence each morning, or a single text of honesty to a friend, or a nightly note where you record one small mercy you noticed. Do that practice not to demand results, but to create the conditions for formation. Check in at the end of the week. Ask, what did I notice? And allow even the smallest observation to be a piece of evidence. We began with the headline, Promise. Listen with faith, because God reveals why you are going through this. That promise is not always a dramatic unveiling. It is often a slow unveiling, a series of small reveals that over time assemble into clarity. For now, what you're being asked is not a guarantee, but a posture. Remain attentive, remain compassionate toward yourself, and remain open to the possibility that the present difficulty is shaping you for a purpose you do not yet see. There is a tension here that I will not erase for you. We long for explanation and for the relief that often comes with understanding. Yet there is also a deep, stabilizing peace that comes from trusting the process itself. Trust that the silent work matters and that your soul is being trained for something truer than immediate success. Hold both the longing for answer and the willingness to be formed simultaneously. They can coexist. As we prepare to go deeper into this in the next section, I want you to notice 3 things right now. The way your chest feels when you name the present, the small shift in thinking when you imagine the craftsman shaping slowly, and the one tiny thing you can do this week to honor the inner work. Keep those 3 as a thread. They will be the living rope that pulls you through the uncertainty toward the clarity that will come in time as God chooses to reveal it. Hold those 3 small things like a fragile thread. Let them be the line you pull on when the world feels untethered. In the coming days, return to them quietly. The feeling in your chest when you named the present, the craftsman's patience image, the one tiny practice you committed to for the week. These are not magic words, they are anchors. They keep you present enough to notice the slow, invisible changes God is sowing. There is one more posture I want to invite you into that is both demanding and tender. The posture of patient curiosity. When a surgeon studies an X-ray, she does not instantly pronounce a verdict from fear or assumption. She leans in, gathers data, watches how symptoms evolve. Patient curiosity asks questions without inventing answers to fill the silence. It says, I don't know yet. I will observe. I will wait. I will ask better questions. Practice that posture with your interior life. When bitterness rises, ask, where is this coming from? When numbness shows up, ask, what is protecting me? Curiosity keeps you from rushing to condemn yourself and from settling too quickly into a false consolation. This posture also helps you watch for certain traps that can masquerade as spiritual depth, but are actually avoidance. One trap is performative spirituality, doing busy spiritual activities to look holy while refusing to sit with the real hurt. Another is cynicism dressed as realism, declaring nothing will change and then locking all doors against risk. Both of these feel like protection, but they are brittle. A formed soul learns patience without numbing, holds hope without demanding signs, and remains teachable rather than defensive. You may wonder how long this season might last. That is a fair question. Scripture offers no timetable. For Joseph, it stretched years. For others, it is shorter. The point is not the length but the fidelity of your presence. Consider commitment more than calendar. Commit to the practices that keep your interior open and tender for the long haul, not just until the next visible change. Promise yourself small continuities. 5 minutes of unhurried noticing each morning. 1 truthful conversation a week. A weekly journal entry of 3 things you saw God do. Keep those promises to yourself as if you were tending a small, fragile flame. There is another resource the Bible uses again and again in hidden seasons. Story. Our narrative identity, how we make sense of our life, is a field in which formation happens. Joseph's story did not invent itself in prison. It was told, remembered, and finally confessed in public when the moment came. In the meantime, Joseph carried his identity privately, a servant of God, a dreamer, a faithful steward. How you tell your story in small moments matters. Are you telling it as a tale of shame or as a tale of becoming? Both are true. Shame and becoming can be present at the same time. But if your inner narration collapses into a single sentence, I failed, or I lost everything, you truncate your capacity to notice nuance. Practice adding adjectives. I failed and I am learning. I lost something and I am being taught. These small grammatical shifts are spiritual disciplines. They reorient mind and heart. Let's consider the role of memory in formation. Memory is not only a museum of wounds, it is also a treasury of evidence. Remember the times when a small mercy arrived, someone's unexpected kindness, a sunrise that felt like grace, a word that landed in a hard moment. Keep a small list of these memories where you can access them. In darker hours, this list functions like a lifeline. Joseph could recall the dreams, the visions that first arrived. He could also recall moments of integrity where he acted faithfully, even when no one watched. Those memories held him together and gave him moral capital to draw on later. Now, a few practical invitations framed as lights along the path. None are prescriptions that guarantee outcomes. They are small experiments in faith, simple, repeatable acts that keep you available to the quiet craftsmanship of God. First, adopt a weekly notice and name ritual. Each Sunday evening, write 1 paragraph about where you saw God move in the prior week. Keep it short, 3 to 5 sentences. If you don't see anything, write that honestly. The exercise is not about faking vision. It is about training your perception to notice threads rather than headlines. Second, practice the art of a single, honest conversation. Identify one person who embodies trust, someone who can listen without needing to fix. Schedule a 30-minute check-in with them this week. You do not have to solve everything in that hour. Your task is simply to speak 1 truthful sentence about your present state and accept 1 question or 1 silence in return. Vulnerability in measured doses is often the slow medicine of healing. Third, steward your small responsibilities. This goes back to Joseph, faithful service where you are placed. Keep one small duty that matters and do it with care. The way you make the morning coffee, the work you do that builds competency, the task you complete at home. Small faithfulness matters. It trains the muscle of responsibility without demanding wide recognition. The reward is internal, steadier character, gained competence, and quietly expanding trust. Fourth, make space for lament. Lament is not decorative sorrow. It is a spiritual language that brings the ache to God. You can do this simply by saying aloud what hurts, or by writing a letter you do not send, or by composing a brief lament prayer that names the injustice, the disappointment, and the longing. Lament resists premature cheerfulness and helps the wound speak its truth, which is necessary for healing. Fifth, choose one small act of generosity each week. Generosity in seasons of lack is a paradoxical way to guard the heart from scarcity thinking. It need not be financial. It can be time, encouragement, a note to someone, or a meal shared. Giving in small measures keeps your hands open and prevents the heart from hardening into a fortress of self-preservation. Sixth, practice Sabbath micro-moments. These are short rehearsals of sacred rest. 15 minutes when you intentionally pull away from productivity and allow your soul to be tended. Turn off devices for that quarter hour, breathe slowly, notice one good thing, and offer a brief sentence of gratitude. This tiny rehearsal counters the habit of relentless achievement that often hides behind spiritual language. Seventh, consider making a small symbolic act of release for a grief you have been holding. This could be writing a farewell and burning it safely, or planting a seed in soil, or leaving a note of release in a place of memory. Symbolic acts make intangible losses tangible and allow grief a shape to move through. All these practices are meant to create the conditions in which interior work thrives. They are not magic, they are preparation. At some point, often unexpectedly, you will notice a new kind of courage. It shows up not as loud triumph, but as steadier fidelity. You will keep showing up in a way you once could not. You will choose integrity, where lying would be easier. You will say no to resentment and yes to a small act of mercy. These are the fruits of formation. They silently accumulate like rings in a tree, not always visible from the outside, but real and measurable on the inside. Remember also that God's revelation of purpose is often communal. Joseph's vindication came in a context where many lives were at stake. The hunger of nations, the preservation of a family, these larger concerns aligned with Joseph's private formation. For you, your formation may not only affect your own story, but the people who depend on you in ways you cannot yet envision. If you are tempted to hedge all your energy inward, remember that formation enlarges your capacity to love and serve. Your quiet fidelity matters beyond your own comfort. There will be hard days when cynicism seems more logical than faith. In those moments, choose a tiny act of trust that costs you little but signals readiness. Send a note of encouragement to someone. Say yes to a small responsibility you can handle. Give 1 minute of undivided attention to your child or friend. These embodied choices keep you from becoming a spectator in your own life. Let's return for a moment to the end of Joseph's arc. Not to retell every scene, but to draw out a pastoral truth. When Joseph eventually revealed himself to his brothers, his forgiveness was not a trivial concession. It was the fruit of many nights in which he had rehearsed faithfulness despite betrayal. Forgiveness in Joseph's case did not mean forgetting or invalidating the harm. It meant choosing a future that would not be hostage to bitterness. For you, forgiveness may look different. A private letting go of a narrative that keeps you trapped. A decision not to keep replaying the same hurt as your identity, a release of the demand that others repay you on your timetable. Forgiveness is as much about your future health as it is about the other person. It frees you to be formed rather than fossilized. At the same time, be wary of cheap forgiveness that bypasses justice or ignores necessary boundaries. Forgiveness is not the same as unwise trust. Joseph's story shows wisdom. He forgave, but he did not pretend everything was unchanged. He navigated power and prevented further harm. In your life, forgiveness should often be paired with prudence and wise boundaries. Saying, "I forgive," does not obligate you to trust recklessly. It simply removes the corrosive hold that resentment can have. You may be tempted to think that watching for evidence of formation is a passive exercise. Sit and wait and hope. That is not the case. The watching is active. It includes deliberate attentions, honest conversation, small disciplines, and a refusal to be isolated. Formation grows best within a network of truth-tellers and companions. Seek a community, one trustworthy person, one small group, one mentor, where you can speak truth and receive it. Community is not always a cure, but it is a crucible where formation is tested, refined, and made public. There is one more spiritual tendency to address, the tendency to spiritualize everything. It is tempting to interpret every setback as providentially engineered to shape you in a specific way. That reading can be comforting, but it risks minimizing real brokenness and injustice. Not all suffering is redemptive, and not all hardships are precise mechanisms of divine pedagogy. Maintain a posture of theological humility. Say, perhaps this is forming me in these ways. Perhaps there are consequences at work. Perhaps there is sin or structural injustice that must be addressed. This multivalent posture keeps you honest, prevents simplistic piety, and opens space for both lament and action. If you find yourself at a crossroads where external change becomes possible, an offer, a door, a new relationship, apply the same measure of discernment you used in waiting. Are you entering from fear or from faithful attentiveness? Does this new path amplify the character you have been forming? Sometimes the answer will be yes. Sometimes you will need to say no. Formation does not obligate you to accept every opportunity. It equips you to choose wisely. In moments when the silence is particularly loud, remember that listening with faith is not passive resignation. It is a posture of active attention, a combination of hope and watchfulness. You listen by attending to Scripture, to prayer, to the small evidences in your life, and to the counsel of trusted companions. You listen by refusing to be hurried into false certainties and by agreeing to hold both longing and trust together. I want to be practical here with a humble, guided 2-month practice you can try, small, repeatable, and measurable, if you feel willing. This is not a formula guaranteeing results. It is a scaffold to help you stay available. Week 1 to 2. Establish noticing. Each evening, write one sentence about what you noticed that could be a sign of God's presence. Keep it brief. Build the habit. Week 3-4. Add one honest conversation. Schedule 30 minutes with one person and practice speaking one truthful sentence about your current inner state. Week 5 to 6. Practice small Sabbath moments. 2 15-minute pockets a week where you intentionally rest and notice. Add one act of generosity in the week. Week 7 to 8. Reflect and integrate. Revisit the list of notices from the past 6 weeks. Name 3 internal shifts, however small, that you see. Share one of them with your trusted person. If at any point this scaffold feels crushing or inaccessible, reduce it. The aim is fidelity, not performance. Return to one thing, the single daily notice. If all else fails, keep that alive. It connects you to a rhythm of attention. There will be moments when you need more than pastoral counsel. If the weight of grief, anxiety, or depression is overwhelming, consider seeking professional help. Spiritual formation and psychological care often work together. Looking for help is not a sign of weak faith. It is an act of love toward the life God is forming in you. As you practice these things, you may begin to perceive a slow rearrangement of priorities. Where once public success dominated your identity, small interior loyalties now take root. You may find your appetite for approval diminishes. You may discover a renewed commitment to integrity over image. These are not losses, they are deep gains. They are the hidden architecture of a life that can sustain blessing when it arrives. Now allow a moment to imagine a future scene, not as a promise but as a horizon. Picture yourself 5 years from now. The external details may be different job, different relationships, different location. What matters in this image is that you stand steadier. Your spine is less bent by others' opinions. You have a sense of proportion that keeps small humiliations from defining you. You carry scars, but they no longer determine your room for joy. What made that future possible was not one heroic moment, but the accumulation of small acts of faithfulness over time. This is the kind of future formation aims for. We return finally to Joseph, briefly, because his life holds a last pastoral sketch worth noting: timing and alignment. When Joseph rose to power, it was not merely because he had been faithful, it was also because the season and the place aligned with what he had been formed to do. There was a famine. Egypt needed someone with administrative skill and moral steadiness. Your season may have similar mysterious alignments ahead. You may be formed in ways that make you particularly useful for a future need you cannot yet foresee. This is a humbling encouragement. Your pain might eventually be a resource for many, not just a personal refining. Hold that possibility without bartering for it. Do not endure hardship solely in hopes of later utility. Sufferings do not automatically become noble because someone later benefits. But when suffering is held with faith, its rawness can be woven into a tapestry that supports others. That is grace, not a guarantee, but a possibility. If you feel tempted to assess your life by a scoreboard, resist it. Growth often looks like less visible virtues, steadier relationships, clearer conscience, quieter joy. If you can measure those, you are not failing to progress. Before we close, let me leave you with 3 short sentences to carry in your pocket. Repeat them when confusion crowds in and the silence feels too loud. Not late, not broken, in process. Listen with faith. Not because faith will produce a tidy answer immediately, but because faith keeps you present to the small revelations God sends. Listen with faith because God is often most at work beneath the surface. Listen with faith because sometimes the first reveal is not a change in circumstance but a change in you. May God grant you the courage to remain open in the waiting, the tenderness to offer mercy to yourself, and the wisdom to notice the small signs of formation. May you be sustained by the quiet presence that works beneath the soil of your life, and may you find in time that the very places that hurt the most became the ground of your deepest strength. If this word has steadied you for even a moment, and you would like to return for more encouragement, consider subscribing and coming back. We meet here again to remember that you are not alone in the silent seasons. May you walk on, not hurried, not hardened, but listening with faith.